An immigrant risked his life to save a drowning girl, never suspecting she was a princess. That single moment, a desperate lunge into churning water as rain pelted his face, would alter Mateo Alvarez's destiny in ways he could never have imagined. The Baltic Sea crashed against the docks with unusual fury that November afternoon. Mateo pulled his threadbare coat tighter, fingers stiff with cold as he secured the last of the shipping crates. 3 months in Copenhagen, and still the chill penetrated deeper than any winter he'd known back home in Valencia. But this was his life now. Long hours loading cargo ships, sleeping in a cramped apartment with 5 other immigrants, sending what little remained of his wages back to his mother and sisters. He left Spain with nothing but a small leather pouch containing his father's watch and a promise to build something better from the ruins of their family's life after his father's death. Some days like today, that promise felt impossibly heavy. Alvarez, finish up and go home. Storm's getting worse, his supervisor called over the howling wind. Mateo nodded, relief washing over him. The thought of his small bed, cramped but warm, was the only comfort awaiting him. He grabbed his lunch pail and started toward the harbor exit when something caught his eye. A flash of blue against the gray waves crashing against the pier's edge. There, clinging to a wooden piling, was a small figure. A child, maybe 10 or 11, struggling against the current. A girl with dark hair plastered against her pale face, her blue coat billowing around her like a broken sail. Later, Mateo would struggle to explain what happened next. He didn't remember dropping his lunch pail, didn't remember tearing off his coat. There was only the terrible knowledge that she wouldn't last another minute in those freezing waters. The shock of cold stole his breath as he plunged into the Baltic Sea. The current immediately tried to sweep him away, powerful and merciless. Salt water burned his eyes, filled his nose. Each stroke toward the girl felt like swimming through concrete. But something inside, perhaps his father's voice, perhaps just the stubborn pride that had carried him across borders, refused to let him turn back. When his fingers finally closed around the sodden fabric of her coat, Mateo felt a surge of desperate hope. Her eyes, wide with terror, locked onto his. "Hold on to me," he gasped in broken Danish. "I've got you." The journey back to the pier was a blur of pain and determination. Twice they went under, the weight of their soaked clothes pulling them down. Mateo's muscles screamed in protest, lungs burning for air. But the small, trembling body clinging to him kept him fighting against the brutal current. Hands reached down from the pier, grabbing them both. Mateo felt himself being hauled up, the rough wood scraping his palms as he collapsed onto the dock. The girl still clutched against his chest. They lay there, both shivering violently, as shouts echoed around them. Someone draped a heavy blanket over his shoulders. Someone else was speaking urgently into a phone. "You're going to be all right," Mateo murmured to the child, though he wasn't sure she could hear him through her chattering teeth. "You're safe now." He didn't notice the black sedan screeching to a halt at the dock entrance. Didn't see the men in dark suits running toward them, speaking rapidly into earpieces. It wasn't until they surrounded him, their faces tense with urgency, that Mateo realized something was very wrong. "Step away from Her Highness," one man ordered in Danish, reaching for the girl. Mateo blinked in confusion, his mind sluggish from cold and exhaustion. "Her... what?" The girl looked up then, her pale face framed by tangled dark hair. Despite her bedraggled appearance, there was something in the way she held herself, even now, a composure beyond her years. She spoke quietly to the man in Danish, too rapid for Mateo to follow, her small hand still clutching Mateo's sleeve. Later, as he sat trembling under hospital lights, a doctor examining his bruised ribs, Mateo would learn the truth. The girl he'd pulled from the freezing Baltic was Princess Elisa of Denmark, the youngest daughter of the royal family, who had slipped away from her security detail during a harbor visit. But in that moment, all he knew was that the small, shivering girl was being whisked away by stern-faced men, and that she had turned back once to look at him with eyes that seemed to hold a promise, though of what he couldn't possibly imagine. The following morning, Mateo dragged himself to the docks despite his supervisor's insistence he take the day off. His body ached, lungs still raw from yesterday's ordeal, but missing work meant missing pay. And the money he sent home each month was already barely enough. "You're all over the news, you know," Jakob, a fellow dock worker from Poland, said, tossing a newspaper onto the crate between them. "Hero immigrant saves royal princess." Mateo glanced at the headline, uncomfortable with the attention. The grainy photo showed him on the dock, soaking wet, the small figure of the princess beside him. He looked away, focusing instead on securing the ropes before him. "It wasn't like that," he muttered. "Anyone would have done the same." Jakob laughed, a short, disbelieving sound. "No, my friend. Most would have called for help and watched her drown while waiting. You nearly died yourself." Matteo shrugged, wincing at the pain in his shoulders. The truth was, he hadn't thought at all, just acted. The way his father had taught him, when someone needs help, you help. No questions, no calculations, just open hands and a willing heart. He was midway through his shift when the black sedans appeared again, 3 of them this time, gliding to a stop at the harbor entrance. Matteo's stomach tightened. Had he broken some law by touching a royal? Would he be deported now, his family's lifeline cut off? The royal guard from yesterday approached, his face unreadable. "Matteo Alvarez, please come with me." His co-workers stared as he was escorted to the middle vehicle. Inside, a distinguished older man in an impeccable suit sat waiting. "Mr. Alvarez," the man said in English, extending his hand. "I am Henrik Larsson, private secretary to the royal family. Her Majesty the Queen requests your presence at the palace." The palace. The words seemed to hang in the air, impossible and dreamlike. Matteo looked down at his work clothes, stained, worn at the knees, smelling of fish and salt. "Like this?" he asked, gesturing helplessly at himself. For the first time, Henrik's formal expression softened slightly. "Her Majesty understands you were called from work. But if you prefer, we can stop at your residence first." 20 minutes later, Matteo stood in the tiny apartment he shared, frantically washing his face while his roommates looked on in astonishment. He changed into his only good shirt, the one he saved for calling his mother on video chat, and a pair of jeans with only one small tear at the knee. The drive to Amalienborg Palace passed in a blur. Matteo sat rigid, hands clasped tightly in his lap, heart hammering against his ribs. Through the car window, Copenhagen slid by, the city that had been his home for 3 months, but where he still felt like a ghost, invisible except when someone needed cheap labor. The palace guards stood at attention as their car approached. Matteo felt increasingly out of place with each passing moment. The marble floors, the gilded frames, the hushed voices. This was a world that people like him glimpsed only from the outside. He was led through corridors that seemed to stretch endlessly, each room more ornate than the last. Finally, they paused before a set of double doors. Henrik turned to him. "Her Majesty and Princess Elisa await you in the small reception room." A simple bow was customary when greeting the Queen. Matteo nodded, his mouth too dry for words. The doors swung open. The room, despite its name, was larger than his entire apartment. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, illuminating 2 figures waiting near a fireplace. One was a woman of perhaps 50, elegant and composed in a simple blue dress. Beside her stood the girl from the harbor, Princess Elisa, looking remarkably different in a cream-colored dress, her dark hair neatly braided. But her eyes were the same. They found his immediately, and the smile that spread across her face eased some of the tension in Matteo's chest. "Mr. Alvarez," the Queen said, her English perfect but warmed by a Scandinavian accent. "Please come in." Matteo approached and gave an awkward bow, unsure if he was doing it correctly. When he straightened, he found the Queen studying him with unexpected warmth. "You saved my daughter's life," she said simply. "There are no words adequate to express our gratitude." Matteo shifted uncomfortably. "Anyone would have." "No," the Queen interrupted gently. "According to the harbor master, the conditions yesterday were life-threatening. The fact that you both survived is remarkable. You risked everything for a stranger." Elisa stepped forward then, her composure momentarily giving way to the child she was. "I was so scared," she said in careful English. "But then you were there, and you told me I would be safe." She reached out, offering him a small velvet box. "I asked Mother if I could give you this myself." Inside was a medal, gold and blue enamel, hanging from a red and white ribbon. Matteo stared at it, uncomprehending. "The Royal Medal of Courage," the Queen explained. "Rarely awarded, and never has it been more deserved. But it was what came next that would truly change everything. We also understand, Mr. Alvarez, that your current situation in Denmark is precarious." The Queen's choice of words was diplomatic. "My secretary tells me you're here on a temporary work permit, living in difficult conditions, supporting family abroad." Matteo felt heat rise to his face, shame mingled with defiance. He had never asked for charity. "I manage, Your Majesty," he said stiffly. The Queen's expression softened. "Of course you do. Men like you always find a way. But perhaps you would consider a different position? The palace has an opening on our maintenance staff. The hours are regular, the pay considerably better than dock work, and it includes proper housing on the grounds. The room seemed to tilt slightly. Matteo steadied himself, certain he had misunderstood. You're offering me a job? At the palace? Princess Elisa was watching him eagerly, clearly in on the plan. You would be here, where I could see you. She said, I told Mother you must be very good with your hands to have saved me from the water. Despite everything, the formality, the overwhelming surroundings, the unreality of the situation, Matteo felt a smile tug at his lips. I was a carpenter before. In Spain. Even better, the Queen replied. We have need of such skills. Is this something you might consider, Mr. Alvarez? Matteo thought of his cramped bed, the endless loading and unloading of ships, the constant fear of his permit not being renewed. He thought of what this would mean for his mother and sisters. Stability, perhaps even bringing them to join him someday. Yes, he said finally, his voice steadier than he felt. I would be honored. Spring came to Copenhagen, melting the last traces of winter from the palace gardens. Matteo's hands, once raw from harbor work, had regained their craftsman's dexterity. 4 months in the palace had transformed his life in ways he was still struggling to comprehend. His new quarters, a small but comfortable apartment in the staff wing, felt like unimaginable luxury after the crowded flat he'd shared with 5 other men. The regular meals, the security of knowing his position was protected by royal decree. These things had allowed him to breathe freely for the first time since leaving Spain. He bent over the delicate wooden birdhouse taking shape beneath his hands. This wasn't part of his official duties. It was a gift for Princess Elisa's 12th birthday next week. The little royal had become an unexpected presence in his life, appearing in his workshop with curious questions or simply watching him work in companionable silence. That's beautiful, a voice observed from the doorway. Matteo looked up to find Anna Larson, the palace head housekeeper, watching him work. Over the months, she had become something of a guide to him, helping him navigate the complex social hierarchies of palace life. Do you think she'll like it? He asked, suddenly uncertain. Anna smiled, moving closer to inspect his craftsmanship. She'll treasure it. The princess has quite taken to you, you know. Matteo carefully set down his tools. She's a good child. Smart, too. Her English is getting better than mine. And your Danish is improving, Anna replied, switching to that language. Matteo laughed. Slowly, very slowly. There was a moment of comfortable silence before Anna spoke again, her tone more serious. The palace staff dinner is tomorrow night. You'll attend this time? Matteo hesitated. Despite months at the palace, he still felt like an outsider among the staff, many of whom came from families that had served the royals for generations. He ate most meals alone in his quarters or in his workshop. Anna sighed at his silence. Matteo, you can't keep yourself apart forever. You've earned your place here. Had he, though, sometimes the weight of his good fortune felt overwhelming, undeserved even. He had done nothing special, just acted as his father would have. Yet here he was, in a royal palace, his family now comfortably housed in a small but decent apartment in Valencia, thanks to his new salary. I'll think about it, he conceded. Anna looked like she wanted to say more, but was interrupted by a knock at the workshop door. Henrik Larsson, the Queen's secretary, stood there with his usual formal expression. Mr. Alvarez, Her Majesty requests your presence. There's someone she would like you to meet. Curious and slightly apprehensive, Matteo followed Henrik through the palace corridors. They entered not one of the formal reception rooms but the Queen's private study, a warm, book-lined room where Matteo had never been invited before. The Queen wasn't alone. Seated opposite her was a dark-haired woman in her 30s, elegantly dressed but with a practical air about her. She rose when Matteo entered, studying him with intelligent eyes. Matteo, this is Sofia Mendez, the Queen said after he had made his bow. Milliers. Mendez is the cultural attaché at the Spanish embassy here in Copenhagen. The woman extended her hand. It's a pleasure to meet you, Mr. Alvarez. I've heard quite a lot about you. Matteo shook her hand, confused by this unexpected introduction. Your Majesty, Miss Mendez, I don't understand. The Queen gestured for him to sit. Sir. Mendez approached the palace last week. It seems your story has traveled rather farther than you might have imagined. Sofia Mendez leaned forward slightly. A Spanish immigrant rescuing a Danish princess? It caught attention back home. Several newspapers ran the story. Matteo shifted uncomfortably. I didn't do anything for recognition. Precisely why it resonated. Sofia replied with a small smile. But there's more to it than that. Your hometown in Valencia, they're quite proud of you. The mention of home sent an unexpected pang through Matteo's chest. He thought of sun-baked streets, His father's small carpentry shop now shuttered and empty, the cemetery where his father rested. The mayor has been in contact with our office, Sophia continued. They're planning a cultural exchange program with Copenhagen and would like you to be part of the inaugural event. The Queen nodded. We think it's an excellent opportunity, Matteo. Denmark and Spain strengthening ties through ordinary people who do extraordinary things. I'm hardly extraordinary, Matteo protested. A matter of perspective, the Queen said gently. Sometimes courage is most extraordinary when it feels most natural to the person showing it. The conversation continued, details explained about a week-long cultural festival to be held in Copenhagen, with a sister event in Valencia. Matteo would be asked to speak briefly at the opening ceremony, to stand as a symbol of connection between the two nations. Later, walking back to his workshop in a daze, Matteo struggled to process what was happening. From invisible immigrant to palace employee to, what? A symbol? A bridge between worlds? The thought was overwhelming. Princess Elisa found him there an hour later, sitting motionless beside the half-finished birdhouse. Mother told me about the Spanish festival, she said, perching on a stool across from him. At nearly 12, she carried herself with increasing poise, though her eyes still held childlike curiosity. Are you happy to represent Spain? Matteo looked up, struck by the directness of her question. I don't know if I'm the right person, he admitted. I'm just a carpenter who happened to be at the harbor that day. Elisa considered this with surprising seriousness for her age. But that's why it should be you, she said finally. Because you don't see yourself as special. My tutors say the best leaders never think they deserve to lead. Despite himself, Matteo smiled. And do your tutors say princesses should spend so much time in dusty workshops? Elisa grinned, the formal princess momentarily replaced by a mischievous child. They say princesses should learn from people with wisdom. And you must be wise because you knew exactly what to do when everyone else just watched. Her simple faith in him was humbling. And perhaps, Matteo thought, there was something to what she said. Not about wisdom, he claimed none of that, but about representation. Who better to speak for the immigrants who built their lives in new lands than someone who understood their struggles firsthand? Will you tell me about Spain? Elisa asked suddenly. For my geography studies. And so Matteo began to speak of home, of olive groves and ancient cathedrals, of his father's workshop where he'd learned to coax beauty from raw wood, of his mother's paella that brought neighbors from blocks away. As he spoke, something tight in his chest began to loosen. For the first time since arriving in Denmark, he found himself remembering home not with pain, but with pride. Perhaps he thought he could do this after all. The cultural festival transformed the heart of Copenhagen. Spanish flags flew alongside Danish ones along the main thoroughfares. Music filled the squares, flamenco guitars mingling with Nordic folk tunes in a surprisingly harmonious blend. The scent of paella and churros wafted from food stalls set up beside vendors selling traditional Danish pastries. Matteo stood at the edge of the main stage in City Hall Square, heart pounding beneath his new suit. A gift from the palace staff, delivered to his quarters that morning with a note from Anna that read simply, "No excuses. We'll all be there." From his position, he could see the royal dais where the Queen sat with Princess Elisa and other members of the family. Beyond them stretched a sea of faces. Hundreds, perhaps thousands of people gathered for the opening ceremony. 5 minutes, Mr. Alvarez, a festival coordinator told him, clipboard in hand. Matteo nodded, swallowing hard. The Spanish ambassador had already spoken, as had the Danish Minister of Culture. Now it would be his turn. Just a few minutes to represent the human connection between nations. He felt a presence beside him and turned to find Henrik, the Queen's secretary, standing there with uncharacteristic informality. Her Majesty asked me to give you this, Henrik said, pressing something small and heavy into Matteo's palm. It was a carved wooden pendant on a simple cord, a small boat riding an ocean wave. The craftsmanship was basic but earnest, clearly the work of a child. Princess Elisa made it herself, Henrik explained. She said to tell you it's for courage, though she believes you already have plenty. Matteo's fingers closed around the pendant, emotion tightening his throat. After a moment's hesitation, he slipped it over his head, tucking it beneath his shirt where he could feel it against his skin. When his name was announced, Matteo walked to the podium with his father's words echoing in his mind. Stand straight, speak truth, and remember where you come from. The crowd before him blurred slightly. For a terrifying moment, his carefully prepared words evaporated. Then his hand found the wooden pendant beneath his shirt, and he began to speak. Not from his written notes, but from his heart. I stand before you not as anyone special, he said, his accented English carrying across the square, but as one of many who have left home seeking something better. We immigrants carry two hearts, one for the land of our birth, one for the country that gives us new life. As he spoke, faces in the crowd came into focus, not an intimidating mass, but individuals. He saw Danish families listening intently, immigrants like himself, nodding in recognition of shared experiences. On the royal dais, Princess Elisa watched him with undisguised pride. The day I jumped into the harbor, Matteo continued, I wasn't thinking about nationality or status. There was only a child in danger and the knowledge that I could help. This is the simplest and most powerful connection between all people. Our capacity to care for one another across every boundary. He spoke for less than 5 minutes, but by the time he finished, something had shifted in the atmosphere of the square. The applause that followed felt less like a formality and more like a genuine response, a recognition of common humanity. Later at the reception, Matteo found himself surrounded not by the intimidating dignitaries he'd feared, but by people eager to share their own stories. Danes who had lived abroad, immigrants who had made Denmark their home, officials interested in expanding the cultural exchange program to other cities. You've started something important, Sofia Mendez told him, appearing at his elbow with 2 glasses of Spanish wine. She handed one to him. The mayor of Valencia called me immediately after your speech. They want to establish a permanent scholarship program for Danish and Spanish students to study in each other's countries. They're suggesting it be named after you. Matteo nearly choked on his wine. That's not necessary. Sofia laughed. Necessary, no. Symbolic, yes. And symbols matter, Matteo. They help people see possibilities they might otherwise miss. Across the room, he caught sight of Princess Elisa in animated conversation with a group of Spanish children who had performed traditional dances earlier. Despite the formal setting, she looked completely at ease, genuinely interested in what they were telling her. The queen, noticing his gaze, moved to join him. She'll make a good monarch someday, she said quietly. She has a natural ability to connect with people. She does, Matteo agreed. Though I hope that day is far in the future, Your Majesty. The queen smiled. Indeed. After a moment, she added, Your speech was excellent, honest and hopeful, exactly what was needed. Before Matteo could respond, there was a commotion at the entrance to the reception hall. He turned to see a group of new arrivals being welcomed and froze in disbelief. His mother stood there, elegant in a new dress but unmistakable. Beside her were his sisters, Maria and Lucia, looking around in wonder at the opulent surroundings. A small surprise, the queen said, watching his reaction. Miss Mendez helped arrange their visas and travel. They'll be staying for the week of the festival. Matteo couldn't speak. His family here? His mother, who had never traveled beyond their province in Spain? His sisters, who he hadn't seen in person for nearly a year? He moved toward them in a daze. When his mother caught sight of him, her face transformed with joy. She opened her arms, and suddenly Matteo was a child again, enveloped in the scent of home, her tears warm against his cheek. Mijo, she whispered. Look at you. Your father would be so proud. His sisters joined the embrace, their familiar voices washing over him in a tide of Spanish endearments and teasing. For a moment, the reception, the dignitaries, even the royal family faded to background. This was what mattered most. The love that had sustained him across borders, through hardship, despite distance. When he finally looked up, Matteo found Princess Elisa watching the reunion, her expression a mixture of happiness and something like longing. On impulse, he beckoned her over. Your Highness, he said formally, though his voice was thick with emotion. May I present my family? My mother, Elena Alvarez, and my sisters, Maria and Lucia. The princess approached with a smile, switching to careful Spanish that Matteo had been teaching her. I am honored to meet the family of our hero, she said, the foreign words clearly rehearsed but sincere. His mother, momentarily flustered by addressing royalty, quickly recovered her natural warmth. And we are honored to meet the child who brought our son such an unexpected destiny, she replied, taking the young princess's hands in her own. Something in that simple gesture, his mother's weathered hands holding the soft ones of a princess, seemed to capture everything about this extraordinary turn his life had taken. Boundaries crossed, worlds connected, humanity recognized across all divisions of circumstance and birth. Later that night, after showing his family the comfortable guest quarters where they would stay during the festival, Matteo stood alone on a palace balcony. The city lights of Copenhagen spread before him, beautiful and now, somehow, belonging partly to him as he belonged to it. He thought of the parallel lives he might have lived, the struggling immigrant, invisible on the margins of society, the son who had remained in Valencia, taking over his father's modest shop, the man who had walked past the harbor that stormy day without noticing a child in the water. Instead, here he stood, not wealthy or powerful, but connected, to a royal family who had seen his worth, to a country that was beginning to feel like a second home, to a young princess whose life he had saved and who in turn had helped him find a new life of his own. Tomorrow he would show his family the workshop where he now created beautiful things from wood. He would introduce them to Anna and the other palace staff who had slowly become friends. He would watch his mother cook paella in the palace kitchens, an arrangement the head chef had enthusiastically suggested upon learning of her culinary reputation. But for now, Matteo simply stood under the Danish stars, his hand resting on the wooden pendant against his chest, feeling the extraordinary blessing of being fully present in a life he could never have imagined, and yet somehow was exactly where he was meant to be. In saving a princess, he had unknowingly saved himself, not from drowning in water, but from disappearing into the anonymity that so often swallows those who leave everything behind to begin again. He had found not just survival, but belonging, not just work, but purpose. And in that moment, under a sky so different from the one he had grown up beneath, Matteo Alvarez, immigrant, carpenter, bridge between worlds, felt something he had not fully experienced since leaving his homeland. He felt at home.